Good evening, everybody. We're pursuing our journey, our path, finding our path closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's what Mesilas Yesharim is all about, the path of the just, finding our path. And last week, we didn't finish anything. This is a long chapter, Yud Aleph, the chapter of Nikius, of cleanliness, not cleanliness, physical cleanliness, but cleaning ourselves from all unwanted Averas, sins, and bad midot, bad character traits. We finished off last week talking about how important it is to be very careful when it comes to the sort of food that we eat, how kashrus is, and if a person is feeling, he said, a person is feeling far away from Hashem, he feels he's not davening properly, he feels like in his heart, not close to Hashem, even God forbid, maybe he has thoughts of apikorsis, of denial, of kfira, of atheism. So one of the things that this could be is that the food that he's eating is not kosher. Could be not kosher for various different reasons. Could be not kosher because it's tomei, it's an impure animal, or it could be that it's a pure animal which has been shechted improperly, if it's an animal which requires shechita. The word tomei, as we spoke about last week, just to finish off, is connected to the word satum, which means sealed. The effect of non-kosher food is to seal the heart. The heart is the receptacle of the place where a person connects to Hashem, to his emunah. So when the heart is satum, it's an expression called the orla salev. The orla is the skin that surrounds the male member, which is removed during circumcision. There's a spiritual concept called the orla salev, the obstruction of the heart. So the heart is the recipient, so to speak, of that feeling of connection with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. So the Lashon of Tuma is satum, which means sealed, which means covered over, which means that the spirituality that a person should be receiving is intercepted, is blocked by the fact that his heart has become stopped up, has become impervious to the spiritual messages which he's being sent. And so one should be very careful. Okay, so we spoke about the idea of diktuk, of precision, of being very careful that what you eat. Now we're going to move on to another area of nikiyut, another area where a person has to be very scrupulous. The Mesilas Yesharim is a path, and we've already come through the first level of purifying ourselves. We want to achieve a higher level now, which is called nikiyut. So now we're going to speak, excuse me, now we're going to speak about averas, sins, which are engendered, which are generated from contact, and actually put in a different way, which come through being in society, societal things but being in society, that being in the company of other people, can lead to problems. Kagon, honas devarim. Honas devarim means verbal abuse. Verbal abuse could be, I think, also include things like passive aggressiveness, oppressing people with your words, and that can be quite subtle sometimes, putting people down subtly. Halbonas panim, embarrassing people. Hachsholas ha'iver be'etza, causing a person to stumble through bad advice. He's going to go into these in detail. Rechilus. Rechilus means tail-bearing. There are 3 levels of Lashon Hara, what's generally categorized under Lashon Hara, which literally means the evil tongue. The 3 levels are Rechilut, which is, so to speak, the least offensive. Rechilut is connected to the word Rochel. Rochel is a traveling salesman, a peddler. So the idea of Rechilut is somebody who packs up his wares in one place and goes and sells them in another place. So somebody who picks up a bit of gossip in one place and he spreads the gossip in some other place. Now, rechilut could be that it's with no malice aforethought. There's no intended harm. but the mere fact that he is spreading gossip is considered to be an avera because it can lead to people thinking badly about other people. The next level is lashon hara, which is negative speech, which is talking negatively about somebody without, and I'll emphasize this, without any specific necessity. For example, if somebody calls you up and say, "Hi, I'm about to go into business with Shmerel," and you know that Shmerel has just spent the last 6 months in Wormwood Scrubs, which is a very unpleasant prison in London, for embezzlement or, I don't know, what's it called? GTL, whatever. GBH, that's what they call it, grievous bodily harm. And this guy is now masquerading himself as an honest guy, and you know for a fact. So of course you have to say, I think you should say, of course there are ways to say it. You have to say, I think you should check twice about your future business partner. So that's a case where lashon hara is not only permitted but is a mitzvah. But stam, without any reason to speak evilly of somebody, even if it's true. I mean, this is the thing I think surprises a lot of people when they first come across the laws of what's called pure speech, is the idea that if something's true, why can't you say it? People say, well, why is that lashon hara? It's true. It may be true, and let's face it, I guess the newspapers would go out of business tomorrow if they bothered to observe the laws of lashon hara. That it doesn't matter if it's true. If it doesn't have a specific, positive purpose and is not done in a specifically designated way, and there are halachas about what you can say and what you can't say, and even the things that you can't say, how you're supposed to say them. Without those preconditions, then it's an issa d'iraisa. And the worst kind of lashon hara, quote unquote lashon hara being a blanket term for these three levels, is motzi shem ra, which is literally to bring out a bad name, and that means to speak evilly of somebody when it's not true. So I think even that's what they would probably call in secular terminology slander. Slander means speaking evil about somebody if it's not true. But of course, as we've seen, that it's not just enough that it should be true. If there's no positive reason for speaking evilly, badly about somebody, it's completely asa. So that's another thing. Again, interpersonal relations can lead to this. Lashon, we said rechilus. Right, sorry, I got off the topic there a bit. Rechilus is the lowest level, or I don't know if you call it most inoffensive, or the least offensive level of speaking badly. Sina, hatred, unakima, and revenge. Now, he doesn't say it here, but included, of course, in nakima, which is revenge, is something called natira. Now, natira, what's the difference between nakima and natira? So, Rambam says, nakima is somebody comes to you and says, can I borrow your spade? And you say, no, I'm sorry, I'm not going to lend you my spade. So the next week you go to him and you say, can I borrow your spade? He says, no, I'm not going to lend you my spade. That's called revenge. That's a concept I think is well known in even secular law. I don't know if it's prohibited, but it's certainly frowned upon, and the idea of revenge, even a revenge like that, is considered to be negative. There's something that Jewish law recognizes, which is called natira. Natira goes like this. Somebody comes to you and say, can I borrow your spade? You say, no. And the next week you go to them and say, can I borrow your spade? And he says, sure, I'm not like you. That's called natira. That's a kind of revenge. It's a revenge, so to speak, by making the person feel bad, by saying, of course, I'm not like you. Shavuos, vows, and devar sheker, speaking lies, v'chil Hashem, and chil Hashem. Now he says here something interesting, that what's this all got to do with societal, being in society, being in the company of other people? Lost it here. Yes, machmas b'nei Adam. The common denominator between all of these averas, the ones I just mentioned, it's impossible to transgress these in privacy. You don't have this in your books. all of the common denominator of all of these averas, these sins, are that they're only possible to do by if you're with other people. Now, I would take exception to this. I don't think it's largely true for sure, but there's an interesting thing that Chilul Hashem is possible to do in the privacy of your own home. Now people go, well, how can that be? Isn't Chilul Hashem, when somebody does something, I don't know, like a Torah Jew, you see a Torah Jew, or any Jew, somebody Jewish eating a Big Mac. So apart from it being the Avera, that's a Chilul Hashem, he's desecrated in God's name, or if he, whatever it might be, doing something which calls the Torah to be desecrated, or Hashem's name to be desecrated, somebody who's, let's say maybe obviously Jewish, who's arrested for embezzlement or fraud. So, usually it's true that the Chilul Hashem does require a public setting. But there's a very interesting, I forget where I saw this, there's a Torah mitzvah that says that you're not allowed to make oaths. And you shouldn't make oaths, because lest you will, losisa, you shouldn't take Hashem's name in vain. I think it's losisa Hashem b'shav. And it then goes on to say, it's a shema, you will maybe shetachalel shem Hashem, something like that. It's not accurate. Maybe you'll come to, because this will be a Chilul Hashem. So you see, it's possible by making an oath, which is something in private, to be mechal Shem Shemaim. How does this actually work? I don't know, but the Torah says that creates a negative energy in the world by even doing something which is taking an oath in private. It doesn't require other people. And yet that creates a negative energy which will lead to Hashem's name being desecrated. Now it comes out something very interesting, that Ezel Umazeh also Lakim. Hashem makes everything in this world equal and opposite. Meaning, if it's, God forbid, possible to Mimchal Hashem, to desecrate Hashem's name in private, as we just described, it also means that it's possible to be Mekadesh Shem Shemaim in private. There's a very famous Rav Yisrael Salanta, and actually it's not the Rav Yisrael Salanta, it's the Chaim Volozhin, who says that there's a chain effect that, God forbid, if a big Talmid Chacham one day doesn't learn with all his koyach, he learns less than he should. So that causes a domino effect. The domino effect is that somebody who normally learns Iyun will learn Bekiyut. Somebody who learns Bekiyut will put down his Gemara and pick up a Mishnah. All of these are valid limudim, but obviously there's a hierarchy of limud. Somebody who normally learns Mishnah will learn Chumash. Someone who learns Chumash will pick up a book about the life of a Gadol in Israel. Somebody who normally reads Sfarim about Gadol in Israel will pick up a book about some football hero. And somebody, and this chain, this ishtalshalis, this domino effect, will end up with somebody, if I'm not mistaken, he says that a Jewish boy in Paris will marry a non-Jewish girl. Ad kadei kach. So, in other words, just like there's this negative effect that we see, it's possible to have a Chilul Hashem in private, it's also possible to have a Kiddush Hashem in private. How is one Mekadesh Shem Shemaim in private specifically, I couldn't tell you, but for sure, when a person is learning Torah, that's a no-brainer. When a person we learn a lot about kiruv, about going out and doing kiruv, and my Rabbi always says, there's a kiruv which takes place which when you're sitting and breaking your head over a tosfos. Don't think, especially if you feel that this is where you're supposed to, you belong in the base medrash, that you're letting down the side by not going out and trying to make people closer to Yiddishkeit. The mere fact of you breaking your head over tosfos is bringing people closer to Yiddishkeit. How? Because we said there's a domino effect, and the domino effect works both ways. To the extent that you're immersed in Torah, that you say brachas, let's say, with kavanah, this has an effect in hashpa'ah that's called, that goes all the way up to the highest places in Shemayim. This is the Nefesh HaChaim I'm quoting, and comes all the way down into this world as a hashpa'ah, and it can be a good influence for the whole world, or it could specifically be a good influence for the Jewish people. But the point is over here that he's saying that all of these Averas, for example, Chil Hashem, are only, he doesn't say only, are as the result of social intercourse. There was the result of people being together. I'm just pointing out that it could be in that particular case Chil Hashem, that the effects of Chil Hashem, Chas v'Chalila, would also take place even not in company, even not in the Chebra. Okay. Now, he says, who is mi kimi yoma nikisi mehem? Who can say I'm clean of all of these averos we mentioned? Taharti ma'ashma bam. I have cleaned myself, I've rid myself, purified myself from them. Why? Ki anfeihem rabim v'dakim ad ma'od. Because the details and the possibilities of these averas are many, and the how do you say these the fineness, the precision. It's possible that a person, without realizing it, can find that he actually transgressed one of these averas in a very subtle way, because they're dakim. Asher hizhirem bom torach godol, which his hair by him. Somebody who wants to be careful is going to have to exert a lot of energy to make himself noki in this regard. The first thing he starts off is honas advarim, verbal abuse. Verbal abuse, which includes insulting people, which includes, as we said, passive aggressiveness, subtle jibes and snide remarks. All of these come under the category of honas devarim. Bichlala hu ledaber b'fnei charoyer b'davar she'yavosh mimenu. What is the bichlala? The general principle is here is to speak in front of somebody, something which will embarrass him, which will upset him. Kol shekain ha'amira b'feirish davar she'yavosh bo. I'm sorry. Klala b'davar is to speak something which is going to embarrass him, even if it's not a specific, he's going to go into details, into examples, a specific recounting of something that this person did, which will embarrass him, even if it's subtly alluded to. Kol shekain, all the more so if he speaks it out explicitly. Ola sos lo maseh shi'igrom lo shi'avosh, or to do something which might embarrass somebody. For whom Masha Omru b'Perek Hazov, it says in Perek Hazov, Im Haya Bal Tshuva. Here's the example. Let's say somebody's a Bal Tshuva. Lo Yom Aloi. A person shouldn't say, wow, look how far you've come. Remember what you used to be. Remember you used to have an earring in your in your ear. Remember you used to, I don't even start to describe the sort of things that could be said. And now look at you now. This could embarrass somebody. Now, it could be that if somebody, makes well known his past in order to be makar of people to Torah, as an example, or to inspire people, it could be that you would be able to mention something in his past. But I would be very careful, because even somebody who wants to reveal certain aspects of his past may not want everything out in the open. The things that he chooses to reveal, okay, but to question him and quiz him on, I don't know, what was it like and whatever, I'm not sure that's a very good idea. That could be a problem of honas devarim. So, this is a classic example. Im haya bal tshuva lo yarma lo. You shouldn't say to him, zechar ma'asecha rishonim. Think about how you started off. Im hayu chaloim boim la'olov. And so now I just want to say another thing about this. I remember being at a vort. Somebody was getting engaged, and there was a vort, and the local rabbi came. Now it happened that this boy who was getting engaged to a very, very fine family, a very miyuchastika family, and the father was a well-known Rosh Yeshiva, and the family that this boy came from they were Balei Tshuvas. So, and the boy was exceptional, and through his own merits, he merited to marry, somebody who was in terms of yichus far above him. And remember the local rabbi was there. The local rabbi got up and said, wow, this is a miracle. How can it possibly, no, he didn't quite say like that. He complimented the boy on doing so well, but the implication was considering where you came from. And I thought this is a classic example of this, where his intention was to really give the boy a pat on the back, and say, wow, well done. But derech agav, what he was really implying was, considering, where you started off. So that's really a classic example of how careful the person has to be with holiness devarim, when there can be the most, genuine of sentiments and positive of thoughts. You can still end up, you understand what I'm saying? You can still end up in hurting people's feelings. People are very sensitive, and you know why that? Because we all know how sensitive we are. Everybody's sensitive. Everybody's sensitive. Okay, maybe some people, to be a politician, maybe you need to have a thick hide. I don't know. I'm not Donald Trump. I'm not Netanyahu. But people in these positions, to me, I would have caved over long ago with the insults and the public opprobrium that's dished out to them. I'm not saying whether that's right or wrong. I'm just saying, they have to be a pretty stern stuff. I don't know how a person does that. And maybe it does hurt them. Maybe they learn to deal with it. Maybe they have truly thick skins. But I think one can generally assume that most people are sensitive. And you have to be very, very careful and think once and twice and three times before you say anything, which is even maybe a compliment, as we saw. Whenever you talk about people, there's always a danger that something may come out which was unexpected and undesired. It's always best to talk about ideas than about people. Ideas, you're pretty on the safe ground. And I always see when I talk to the Talmidei Chachamim, they very rarely, unless it's Toelis, talk about people. They talk about ideas, they talk about mitzvahs, they talk about Torah concepts, and because really, anyway, okay, enough said. Now, another way person can be insensitive, let's say a person became chas v'chalila sick. So lo yom aloi kederech sha'amru chaver li'ov. You shouldn't say in the way that Eov, Job's friend, said to him, Zachana mi hu noki ovad. Who's clear of sin. In other words, basically saying, maybe it's because of what you did in your past. Maybe the reason why you're suffering now, maybe you have a good thing, maybe it's because of your aveiros. You don't say that to people. The worst thing you can say, God forbid, when you go to somebody sitting shiva, is to say, Kol b'dei Shemayim, everything is from Hashem. Of course everything's from Hashem, but that's not the sort of thing you say to somebody who's just lost somebody very close to them. You have to empathize. You have to be with them in their tsar, not to give them a mussar shmooze, not to tell them it's all right, it's fine. Everything Hashem does is everything Hashem does is for the good. For sure everything does is for the good. But right now, that's not what this person needs to hear. And that is insensitive, and I think that could be honest devarim. Anyway, the next thing it says, Im hayu chamorim. I don't really understand this next one so well, but let's learn it together. Im hayu chamorim bavakshim hemenu tavua. Let's say these donkey drivers come up to you and they say, do you know where we can buy some grain for our animals? Lo yom alehem, you shouldn't say to them, L'chu eitzel ploni, oh yeah, go over down the bottom of the street, turn right, second left, 2 traffic lights, then there's a roundabout, it's about 5 miles from here, and you send these guys to the other side of town, and you know for sure there's nothing over there. They don't sell them. That's something you shouldn't do. Why a person would do that? L'chu eitzel ploni shehu moichet tavua. Go over there, this guy we know sells grain. V'yodea bo shelo mocha tavua miyomov. And you know he never sold grain in his life. Okay, I guess sometimes people do this for pranks. Kids like to do this kind of stuff. But I don't know why somebody would want to do this unless he's just a nasty person. Clear to me. But that's an example of honest devarim. That's lying and making somebody suffer as a result of your lies. Another example would be Kavam Ruzal, Chazal already told us, which is an interesting thing, a frightening thing. Gadol onas devarim me'avonos momon. It's greater the sin of verbal abuse than it is of deceit in monetary affairs. Tricking somebody when it comes to money is considered less serious. Of course, it's extremely serious, but less serious than oppressing somebody with words, insulting somebody, violent speech. V'kol shekain imhu barabim, and all the more so. All of these things we've talked about before are all the more so an avera if you're doing them in public. Shebehedya shaninu, because it explicitly says, we've learned, hamalbim pnei chaveri barabim ein lo chelek l'olam ba. Somebody who makes a person's face go white, he embarrasses them. It says that it's ein chelek l'olam ba. It's like he killed him, because Chazal tell us what happens is the person, first of all, his face flushes, and then literally the blood leaves his face, and that's a simon that at some level that's considered to be like you killed him, and he has no chelik in olam haba. V'amar Rabbi Chisda, it says, Rabbi Chisda says, Kol ha-sha'orim ninalu chutz mi sharei ona. Now this needs a little bit of explanation. The Rashi over there explains that somebody who's been verbally abused and he cries out, the gates of prayer are not locked for him. It says, Kol sharit shamayim nanalu are locked. Chutz mi, a few gates. There's the shad ma'ot, the gate of tears. If a person cries when he's davening, has access, his prayers will be brought through to shamayim, because the gate of the gate of tears is never locked. The question, I think it's the Kotzker Rebbe once said, if the gates of tears are never locked, so what do you need gates for? So he says there are one kind of tears for which the gate of tears is locked, and those are the tears of what's the word in English? Of despair. Despair meaning that Hashem can't help me. If a person gives up on Hashem, then those are not tears which beseech rachamim, a mercy from Hashem. Those are tears of yeyush, of despair, of giving up, so the gate of tears do lock for those kind of tears. Now there's another gate of prayer which is not locked, and that is for one who's been verbally abused and he cries out to Hashem. As a result of that verbal abuse, his prayers are going to be heard by Hashem, and oy vavoy for the person who caused that verbal abuse. Farmar says, Rabbi Elazar said, Hakol HaKadosh Baruch Hu nifra al yidei shliach chutz me ono. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when he wants to exact punishment from somebody for an aveira, it's always done by a shliach, by an agent. Chutz me ono, apart from the person who has been insulted, verbally abused in some way. This Hashem exacts payment, he himself, which understandably is a far greater punishment. Shalosha ein hapargod nil al bifneim ve'echad hem oina. There are three types of sins where there's no hope, because the pargod, the curtain, the division up in Shemayim is not locked. They go straight through and they get immediately punished. And one of those three aveiras is, again, onos devarim, verbal abuse. And even if when it comes to a mitzvah, because it says in the pasuk, it says in Vayikra, a person is supposed to give rebuke to somebody if they're doing something which is against the Torah. But Chazal say in Erchin, Yochol, I might think afilu ponov mishtanois, that you can reprove somebody even if their face changes, you see that you've embarrassed them or upset them. Talmud Loma v'lo sisa olav chet. The next part of the pasuk says, and it shouldn't be risen up against him a chet, Don't velosi sa'olav ched. Do not make it. Sorry. Do not rise up, bring up against him a sin. Meaning, you in the process of you giving him this rebuke, which you have a mitzvah to do, but you have to do it in such a way that he's not embarrassed, he's not insulted, which is a very difficult thing, by the way, because most people, however subtly you tell them they didn't do something wrong, it's very difficult to do. I think it's a tremendous skill and requires somebody on a very high level. The times that I've been rebuked by people, I see that if it's somebody on a very high level who I instinctively feel is has tremendous Avos Yisrael, he loves the Jewish people, and he's a people lover, and he's a very holy person, then it's acceptable. One takes it. But it's very difficult to be on that level that a person, will accept it without upsetting him. Mikol eile ha'ma'amarim, from all of these sayings of Chazal, Tireh, you will see ad heichon, until exactly how far mispashtim, that extends, they spread out the anfei, the branches of Hazara Hazos, of this warning to be careful, uvakana onsha kasher, and how serious is the punishment. Okay, I think we're going to stop here because the next section I don't think we can finish. Next week, Bezrat Hashem, next time we meet, I don't think we'll be meeting in Hanukkah, but the week after Hanukkah, Bezrat Hashem will talk about giving advice to people and how a person has to, when he gives advice, have absolutely no other agenda, as we call it nowadays, than the advice that to do the best for the person he's giving advice to. And even if it may be against his own better interests, could be a situation where somebody comes to you to advice, and let's say, I don't know, he wants to take a certain young lady out he's heard good things about her, and you know that, I don't know, your son has been recommended this girl, so what do you do in that situation? You have a vested interest. So the answer is, just a brief, snapshot of what's to come, is you have to say, I have a vested interest in this. You have to tell him. And therefore what I'm going to say, I can't tell you is 100% without, I have a vested interest. I think it's called what is it? In the light of full disclosure, that's what they call it. Have to have full disclosure. Or if you don't want to, or you can't in some situations, tell him something that you know that will prevent you from giving him unbiased advice, you just have to say, I'm very sorry, but I'm afraid you have to ask somebody else. I can't give you advice on this particular topic. Okay, very good. All the best.